Well, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to you. Today I thought I'd show you something kind of special. I had already made a couple of videos that are saying something about Christmas and its connections and so on, and I've actually done that for the last 5 or 6 years now. And many connections, Saturnalia, and all kinds of things. Looking at each person that has a connection to this, actually, and what their elder beliefs were before, and things like that. But what we're going to look at here is things that were not put in the Bible that show Jesus' early years and hookups to this nativity scene here and shortly after, and some of the stories that it shows. Some will be quite enlightening for you, and one of the main reasons I thought I would do this is because we recently did a little series where we showed where God actually, due to his descriptions, actually might be a dragon. Pardon me. If you haven't seen that series, I'll try to put it in the top left-hand corner at the end of all this, and you'll be able to see that depiction and another reason why there might be dragons in a story that's like this. And so in this weird version of it that I'm going to show you, there are Dungeons and Dragons in a nativity story and corresponding stories that are attached to it. So that might come across as quite odd, perhaps, unless you haven't seen the other videos that I've shown, for I do feel like I'm way out in left field here. But you know, people would say this shit is just crazy, except for I can show you all these connections that go like, well, man, that makes a difference there. So let's try to take a look into this. Now, the most that people usually understand about it is that the Bible story is in the Bible. And it's at the start of one of these guys, the Gospels or whatever off of it. But if you look into it, it's really not in all four Gospels. It's only in two of them, and that's kind of telling too, the way it comes off. And the story that we get now that's portrayed to you pretty much is a conglomeration of both of these tales, both of which tell you something quite different than each other. And it's Matthew and Luke. And we'll look into this just a hair and things that are said pretty much. But this is a Christmas story that you haven't heard before. So in these different tales, there's all kinds of things, and I don't know if you've seen any old artwork that's about it, but a lot of them will show these same depictions that we're all familiar with. But then there's some oddities in that too, one where Joseph's not there and stuff, and I remember when I was a kid, people talking about it, like, hey, everything's there, but Joseph, what's the deal? Oh, he went to go get the midwife. Have you ever heard that? If you weren't exposed to it and heard the little tale or the little apologetic that comes off of it, then that's just fine. But there's that idea that's there. Just like the same thing where somebody might miss the donkey that's supposed to be there, that's really not in the story either, or the ox that's in the story that's there, that's really not in the story either. In fact, you got an idea of a manger, but quite often, like the picture we were looking at before, it's not really described as being that, and it's surely not its own little house type of thing. It was a barn attached onto a place where people stay, almost like an old hotel motel thing. Instead of having cars in the parking lot, you'd have all your stuff. And there was no room in the inn, so they had to go out there with the animals. So it'd be quite different than what people think. And you know, the reason that they've blurred that idea, by the way, and did so way back when, is they understood the idea that if there was this star that was so shining and then these people wouldn't be stupid and they would see things going on, and this wouldn't be some solemn moment and some, birth from nothing type situation, and she barely made it, and all of those type of ideas. But those are in a lot of the stories that are in the Bible, but they're also in the Gnostic tales of the time. Now, I recently did a little video saying that, the Bible is, of course, a Gnostic type religion where it's got all these secrets to it, and the whole idea of the 4 books literally is in that Gnostic tradition, where as part of their ascension here, they were supposed to have wrote things, and a lot of times it was having to do with Greek tales and so on, and to try to weave things together into one. So you can actually see that the version that we call Mark or Luke or John or whatever is actually from these Gnostic type of people. We actually don't have any true attachments. When you get real deep into it and all this scholarship, they're like, no, and they're attributing it to people, but it all falls apart from there. It's way away. And then the strange thing about it is there's like 26 Greek scholars that are around the time and historians, and nobody records anything like this happening. So that's another thing, but let's just try to get into this here a little bit and show you the difference of some of the tales that are in there, because at different times you'll have different stories that are there. And so Luke's gospel has this chanting angel type of thing, and here's a depiction of somebody trying to do that thing of an eyes all over in angels, and I'm telling you that has to do with a peacock and its symbology, and the symbology of an astrolabe right here, and how the declamations where you see that it's a vent down left and a vent down right, that's maximum sun tilt this way and that way and so on. And it's very much like what Ezekiel saw. Well, it said they had 4 heads on them and stuff. Those are the 4 cardinal points. And whenever you hook up those 2 devices, now all of a sudden you get to see the face of God that these other people knew about, the Chaldeans and so on. What we're really talking about is archaeoastronomy. So we have that idea that's there, but then there's also that's in Luke with the chanting angels, but then there's a bright star also in Matthew, and the 3 wise men tell that's not really in the other one. So you actually have to kind of put them together and take this part of this tale and that part of that tale and put them together and end up making it to where you have it, because there's shepherds there, and it takes the double to end up making the Christmas narratives that is there. And despite the 2 versions, the biblical Christmas story is actually really short. And it's, when you add it all together, it's only a few chapters really. But theologians have also looked at this as that they must have thrown this in there somehow too. It seems to be that somebody took and go, oh yeah, and I'm going to put that first part in there. And we know now through scholarship that this was written before that one, and everybody's using each other's narratives, or they wouldn't have even said things in the way that they do and copying it the way that they do. But they're also, in that fact, trying to be apologetic right off the bat. So in your Bible alone, it's 4 versions there of these things try to apologetic itself. And there are other things woven into one tale that are not woven into another. But there are reasons for that, and usually it's to connect it to biblical tales of the Old Testament to try to validate Jesus. And we'll talk about a few of those and a few of these other strange tales. And yeah, I said it, we're going to find dragons and a dungeon perhaps, and this strange birth of Jesus that's a little bit different. It's crazy. The whole story's right there, except for what? Yeah, it's one of those kind of things where it tries to whip you up in one way or another. But only those few chapters get combined, and it really tells you nothing about Jesus. But we have this idea there's a manger, and the animals, they're so in love with him. They do this cherish type thing, like, oh, Jesus is so cool. He's the master of beasts, which is part of what that is that's going on there. But Here we have her, and of course she's just exhausted from the whole ordeal that's there. So the ones that will look at what's said here, and hey, if they can do it, we can do it too. I'm going to kind of give you a twist of all three of these, which have the stories in them and in order, and has some of the Jesus stories in there, such as the infancy gospel of Thomas. But also a lot of this is really taken from the history of Joseph the Carpenter, another Gnostic type of book, and the strangely named Proto-Evangelion of James. Now, Thomas was his brother, and so he would have known things like this, and that's why they tried to use that. But we're going to take each one of these three and kind of blend it together and come up with a story. And I'll try to dissect if I could at certain points there. But we're also using some art, and that's going to come important here, but I want you to keep looking at the art, of course, while we do this until I reveal something else about it. You'll actually see that there's a bird that almost looks like a penguin that's made out of a vase here, where they're having counts of Jesus' birth, washing, all kinds of things that are going on with this. But then you see other strange things too that are all known, like that was shown right there. So there are a lot of these Gnostic texts that we've found, and I'd like to mention that a lot of them that were found before are hidden, burned for blasphemy, taken away, and they tried to make them all go away at the very start of this origin. Whenever they pulled it together, they said, well, it's like this. And there are scholars that can show you that idea that goes on. But they've tried to write them all off. And like in a modern day, they write off the pseudo-Matthew, and because it was supposed to be something that was written that was part of Matthew in an ancient time. You know, the truth of that might be that's where the original foreground of Matthew was all about, but then it got changed to this other one, and they're going, no, this is the one, da, da, da. There's a lot of different changes that can be going off of it. And of course, they fed off each other so much. But we have the Dead Sea Scrolls and in Qumran and things like that to come out of it, and that's where a lot of these things come from. So what do they add to the Christmas story? And we want to take a closer look here, because a lot of this art that you see, especially even through the new enlightenment and Elizabethan time, show you something quite different. But then there's oddities that are there, like she's in a black robe at this time, she's in a cave at this time, but the animals are there, there's angels. What's this got to do with it? Well, let's just go ahead and get into this here. Now, the story begins on the outskirts of Bethlehem, just like you may know the story as it is told to you, where they're having to go in a time where there's a Roman census that's going on. So see, this is already in there too, all of that idea. And that was just thrown together to try to give Jesus a Nazareth starting, but having to go to Bethlehem and hooking up to David and all the things like that. But in this story right here, Mary's heavily pregnant, just like in every other story that goes there, and it's no surprise who the baby is or anything like that at this point. But Mary here is about to give child, and she's not quite going to make it, and she's worried about making it. And then suddenly the sky's opening up, and here comes that angel ball thing we were looking at here before. And in that idea, this angel tells them, do not go to Bethlehem. You know, what you need to do is you need to go to this place over here. You should go into this dark, gloomy cave over there, you know, without questioning it at all. And so she does, which is strange with something else I'm going to tell you about a cave like that. But then again, we're talking about finding these Dead Sea Scrolls in caves like that. And peekaboo, guess what we found here? Well, also, this is showing you that they didn't quite make it to the town in this set of stories. But what goes on with this idea? What makes it even more different here? Is it the same old thing? Well, kind of, but different. But Joseph goes off and he tries to get a midwife, because you have to have that, and somebody's going to boil some water and do things, and he needs some help, and they are real close to the town, so he's going to try to go get help. And Mary's left in the cave all by herself, and she tries to get comfortable or whatever in this cold stone floor. And who knows? Next thing it tells you, there's just this big light that glows and comes out, and pa-ding! Now, out of nowhere, here comes baby Jesus. Now, I don't know if you want to edit in a couple of paragraphs as to what she went through in between the point that Joseph left and this point is showing right here. But in their idea, she was pregnant, and then all of a sudden, whoop, and there's the baby right there, and she is still a virgin because of this idea. You following me? Okay, so let's make it even more magical and crazy and mythical so you can show that this was really a mythical story in the idea, because at that time she appears on his lap, or on her, he appears on her lap, and she just stands up. And so this is something also that mocks the idea of Noah. If you've looked into Noah's creation, where they say he had like bright eyes, and people say that's correlated to blue eyes, but he was real pale on blue eyes, and well, that's nothing real big. Well, you know what he did then? He stood up and he started talking in tongues. So you have to have Jesus, he's got to be able to do all of those things, and so they throw something very similar in there. And that's that typology that's in the Bible where certain things keep happening over and over again, right? So the sky in this story, the skies above the cave, and the angels begin chanting and singing and hailing the birth of this divine child, and they say, "Glory to the God in highest, and on earth, peace to men of good pleasure." And they say that's where we get the idea of peace on earth and goodwill towards men, and that we changed it to, or whatever. But here's that. So they've said this now, and realizing that he's got to get back real quick, and he may even have missed the baby. I mean, she was going through cramps. Who knows? They don't talk about any water breaking, anything like that. But of course, they don't talk about that happening in the cave either, or the fact that she went through all of this by herself, apparently, in this idea. But this is the reason Joseph's not in that one picture, because he had to go get the midwife. Well, he does. He comes back. He's got a couple of midwives with him, and he rushes back to the cave, and he comes to find out that, well, when he shows up, he's a little late, and so the picture that you're usually thinking of is nowhere near complete, is it? It doesn't look like the same thing. But if we get to this point, and I'll tell you, there are other depictions that show these other people hanging around, and some people have called them midwives, and other people have called them the wives of the three wise men that show up. Now, the three wise men don't show up in the true tale until actually later, whenever Jesus is all grown up and he's in a house in that tale. But because they clipped that part out, it ends up showing up that, well, she wasn't even in the manger or in a cave. She was in a house. So there's confusion as to whenever these wise men got there, because it was a couple of years later, supposedly. We'll get into the wise men here in a little bit. But, so Salome, this lady over here, is not quite convinced of the divinity of Jesus. Somehow, she didn't get to see anything. No angels came and talked to her or anything like that. So here's a way to validate it to the people who might be questioning it on the outside. And you're supposed to put yourself in this position and then go, oh, and I agree. But what she does is she goes up there and she's questioning and looking upside Jesus and looking at him, and all of a sudden her hand shrivels and turns pale. Oh, what the hell? So as she continues to doubt the infant there, her hand just wilts down. You can picture what that would look like. But then suddenly Jesus reaches over and touches her hand, and when he does, it reforms exactly back to the way that it was. And so that's his magical healing powers and so on too. But see, another reason this one probably didn't get thrown in there, because, well, if you're doubting Jesus, then your arm's going to wilt off. So did Jesus have this power of wilting somebody? And this baby, I mean, whoa. I mean, kids can get out of hand and get mad about something, and if he's God, then oh well. So now you've got baby God, which is a totally weird thought, right? But anyhow, he miraculously heals her hand in this story here, and we're supposed to just go through this like it's not a mythological story. And lo and behold, 3 days later, and that sounds real familiar with everything we can look at, but 3 days later, Mary takes the baby out of the dark cave, and she heads down towards the nearest livestock pen. Now, that just sounds stupid, doesn't it? It doesn't make any sense until you find out, well, they've got to be part of it. So he goes down to the stable so a cow and a donkey could get a good look. Admittedly, that just sounds odd to everybody else, but again, we're trying to put things on Jesus, as many as we can, whenever they made the Bible. So that's the reason some of this comes out as hokey, weird, and what's that all about? Because he's got to make up all these things. He's got to fit all of these things into one. He's got to be Superman and take on traits of other gods, of other people, and all kinds of mythologies. But this is meant to fulfill a prophecy from the Old Testament in Isaiah 1:3. And in that it says, the ox knows its owner and the donkey its master's crib. Now, why does it say that? Well, if you've watched my recent videos, I've done a series that says, Written in the Stars. And I show you quite a different aspect of religion in there, but one of which I go into detail and go, well, since we're here, there's Virgo the Virgin, and here's this Sumerian goddess. Now, we don't have it in ours, but a Sumerian goddess of pregnancy, so she's the midwife. This is why they have to have the midwife there, by the way. What's her name? Salome. Oh, snap. Well, you got to have these animals there too, because Taurus is right there and Taurus is right there, and then what is Pegasus is a donkey. And we've also shown that they've taken in religion conflagrated the Taurus with being a donkey at times, but that horse, if you look, there's no horses in this story. That's coming with the second coming, right? But horses have been in this area since the Hyksos came through and into Egypt and stuff, and they had horses and chariots and curved bows and so on. But here we got him there. Man, that one ear sticking up almost looks like that's a unicorn too, but lo and behold, they have to be involved, because if you'll look in the stars, that's what it's got. It's got the midwife, it's got the baby Jesus inside a Leo and the king baby. Here it is. It's all in one. Go look at it. Written in the Stars. Look it up. It's just a few back. Go to my site. Click on videos. Go back a little bit. And you're like, oh, here they are with the stars on them. Yeah. Oh, that one, huh? Yeah. Check it out. So the animals were to adore him or whatever. It was supposedly, and come, let us adore him. And they always talk about how people and the nativity all get together and everything, but what's this about dragons? Now in this tale, 2 years later, the story jumps ahead, and this is the point. Much later, after the fact, not enter it, where these wise men, who were from the east and astrologers, and they're supposed to be hooking up to Babylonian stuff, come, and then at this time they're bringing frankincense and myrrh and everything and gold, just like in the Bible, but it describes it a little more in detail in this form of it, because there's actually, each of the wise men has 12 commanders, which of course is a sacred number and everything, and it has to do with Sumerians and those numbers. Whenever they use like 60 things in 12 base and stuff, it has to do with that. Although we still have 12 zodiacal signs, we have 12 hours in a day and so on, and 60 seconds in a minute and all those things, and it correlates off of this. So The people that even came up with it later and derived it kept it in the old way. Really quite sacred. But look here, you've got these guys, and they have like Phrygian caps on them and stuff, and different ones, but one's a blonde, he's got a red cap. The other one's, well, he's a blonde or a redhead. He's got a darker cap on him. I don't see the third one there, but it says that he brings along with him 12 commanders, and each of the 12 commanders has 1,000 troops with him. Now, that's a whole lot of people, and in fact, it would be safe to say that the little town of Bethlehem would have grown by a few sizes like the Grinch's heart that day, wouldn't it? In fact, that's almost an impossibility. That's probably reason number 7 going through the list and going like, we can't have this, dude. Or if you're going to have him in Bethlehem, I thought you were going to have him in Jerusalem, but you're changing your mind now. Well, we've got to do one more thing from the Daniel deal. Oh, this shows you it's a conflagration. There are people much wiser than I that have dug into each aspect of it to the point that their fingers bled, and they came out and they go, yeah, I figured it out, and yeah, it's what they're doing, basically. Because there wasn't a star that was over a town like what you just saw right there, and somehow if you were over here, it was over there, and if you were here, it's over there. That's a star not in heaven anymore. That's a star sitting there. And of course, people have taken that to make UFOs and all kinds of things out of. It doesn't make any sense. Well, no, where that star is in Leo and Regulus. And again, look at my written in the stars thing, and you'll see it, and it really looks laid out like the nativity kind of we started off with. But there's a few exceptions in a few of these tales that are still left in. But look at the ones that they took out. You always want to see that to see why they took out and what they took out and why they did it. So after the wise men and their armies leave, the toddler Jesus goes for a stroll around the complex and area and outside, and he goes to the nearby caves, and his ancient parents following close behind him, and a group of ferocious dragons come up and appear. So as Mary and Joseph are caught behind Jesus as a toddler, which is supposed to have been like 2 or 3 years old now, but he's already, like happening, and they're just following behind like, oh, he's got this way about him or something, all right, So he goes off into one of these caves, which may have actually been the cave he was born in, which will come into play again here, but you have this idea that there's these couple of dragons that show up, and Jesus makes this gesture to them and smiles, and that calms them and then charms them, and then they back off deeper into the cave, and whenever they do, Joseph and Mary are showing up, and they kind of saw it. Makes you wonder who could have seen this to write the tale. Well, some of these myths, you're not supposed to go there with your mind. Come on, read the story. Anyhow, so you get these ideas there, and of course Jesus told them later that happened, or who knows what else. But they fell in love with Jesus, but then went away from him. And I'm telling you, in a lot of this old art here, they show it like Jesus here being friends with a dragon in a cave. So I guess this is the point that I should mention, that in stained glass stuff all over, pictures and things like that all over the medieval era. In fact, every picture I'm using here is from the era there, and they all knew about these Gnostic Gospels still. It's not something that got lost at the time of a Qumran cave. It comes all the way up through and into a modern time. And very little of it made it through the Dark Ages, if you will. But in all these ancient Bibles, they show you things like this. And so every picture I've been showing you, and it'll pretty much show them to you again on the way out here as we continue. But we can think of it in that way, I guess. So you think, well, why do they have dragons in there? Well, they had dragons in the Old Testament too. In fact, I've done that recent series about, Yahweh might be a dragon. Look that up. It was just a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. It's kind of why I'm doing this attached to Christmas and its tale, because the baby Jesus right there, at the point that the wise men were leaving, he walked up to the caves, and had dragons right there. But in the Old Testament, it tells you, praise the Lord from the earth, ye dragons. They're going to praise Jesus, fall in love with him, and so on. And all deeps. So now we're invoking the deep and the abyss. In fact, all deeps, from what I understand, the word that's used there could be reconfigurated or figured out in the Septuagint idea as that constellations, the dragons and all constellations in the deep. What's the deep? It's the abyss, but it's not out in the ocean. It's in the sky. Look, it's deeper than the ocean. A little bit, just a little. So here we have this, and so this niche biblical reference, of course, is lost on Mary and Joseph, and it's supposed to be lost on you. And it's one of those Gnostic things where if you know, you know, and you don't, you know, and you don't. So. But he turns away these dragons here, and they're understandably shaken up by the whole ordeal. And actually, Jesus here speaks his very first words. So it's pretty important, and you should be able to put that in somewhere. Strangely about these books, though, whenever they decided to throw them out, they threw the whole thing out with the dishwater. They weren't going to take pieces out of it and keep it. Well, no, that's just left for other Gnostics to do. It's almost like try to blend these two together and throw in these phrases. You've got to make up a whole thing and then throw in these catchphrases. Things like that. That's the idea of what you were said to do whenever you're a Gnostic, right? So here we go. His first words are, be not afraid and do not consider me to be a little child, for I am and have always been perfect, and all the beasts of the forest must tame before me. Now, this is an idea which we talk about a lot in the Sumerian ideals too, about the master of beasts and this concept's there. And so they show this ideal that goes on there. But again, people that have studied this deeply, they say, you know, he's probably 3 to 5 years old whenever the wise men end up showing up, right? They figured this out in 6 AD or something. But that he couldn't have been born on 0. He may be like 4 BC or 2 AD, 3 AD, and then therefore you go there, and then the wise men, and so it's about 6 AD whenever this happens, supposedly. But news of this eloquent dragging, taming toddler gets around town, and soon arrives the court of the king. So we have a little bit more going on there. And this is, of course, the idea of Herod, and is nervous especially as to be started calling us the king of the Jews to be on the safe side. Herod orders a massacre of all the infants under the age of 2, which actually would say that Jesus would have to be 2 or less at this time. Now, this kid that they're telling about that tamed these dragons or whatever, he would have had to have been 4 or 5 in the story here. So now we get a conflagration that doesn't make good sense. But so he kills everybody below the age of 2, and so that would have to do with that, and it fits with the Bible pretty well as long as you'll change that little part of it here. But that's probably reason number 9 or 10 that I've got here on to throw it out with the bathwater. But here's another common cliche trope that they use in the fact that, well, what happens, just like in the other stories here, Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus flee to Bethlehem of Egypt. And they go to Egypt to hide in Egypt, showing you they're, common to do in there. But of course, that's done over again in the Bible a few times in the Old Testament. It's just that common trope that's there, just like 40 days and 40 years in the wilderness and a lot of other ones. Going through water, passing it, getting baptized eventually, things like that. Things get even done in the same order sometimes because that was sacred and so on. So things get kind of apocryphal here again in the same story whenever they're riding in through Egypt, and en route they come through an orchard, which is very similar to the idea of Jesus whenever he's at the olive orchard, and there's a tree there and it's not putting out fruit, just so he decides to wither the thing and curse it. If you've ever heard this story, but really, if we had Aaron's rod there, Aaron's rod would grow plants out of it and so on. And if Jesus had those ideas with him, he could just make it sprout out. Like he could have the idea like the Greek goddess does whenever she comes back for spring, and where she walks and goes, the flowers all grow and bloom. That also hooks up with Easter, with Jesus and everything else, and it's the second coming and the sun. Like shining sun, not like sun like you're looking at here. But she sees this thing there, and even though she's on the top of a donkey here, she can't quite reach this fruit that's out there, because it's not a low-hanging fruit, oh, by the way. And so what does she do? Well, Jesus hops down. Now he's supposedly like 2, 3, whatever, and he talks to the tree. Now he tells the tree, this is a magic tree, he tells it to bend down, O tree, bend I on those branches, and refresh my mother with thy fruit. And the tree bends down and gives her fruit. And there's a whole lot of stained glass that show this depiction in it too, and it's like, well, I know when the stained glass was made, and so therefore, what in the world? These people knew this stuff. This wasn't something lost at Qumran again. But he gives her a well-needed snack, and it's just something that simple there. And with that, the Christmas story kind of comes to an end. And it's a shame that none of this is considered canonical, but I guess you could understand that a few of the little things that are in here are just not going to be able to be done. But also we can see in the way this was put together, kind of like this picture was put together, those animals are there written in the sky right along with this same symbology there, and there's the manger right there to the right of her. There's the virgin, she's laying down. It's just like that. Kinda. And so you get these variations on a theme, and all of these pictures, by the way, that I've been showing are from depictions of churches showing you there's this cow, there's a cave, there's this, that, and the other, and there's usually, by the way, a lamb that's there too. Well, Aries is right there. In fact, Jesus becomes the lamb, and here we go, and then we're going to go around with the circle again and tell you another story. This is a Renaissance painting of Jesus at birth standing upright, that they knew this, just like the Noah story. In fact, it was said, that's what's said about it, is that he did it just like Noah done or something like that. Well, and here's another picture that I've shown you of the German painting and pictograph there, stained glasses of a tree giving Mary its fruit. Somehow these details from the apocryphal Gnostic tales are snuck in the depictions all the way through time in biblical art. And some people would say it's hidden right there, but why would the church guys let you put something that's so freaky on the wall that doesn't go with anything if they weren't well aware of it all? You can say something's hidden in a painting or this, that, and the other in a way, and then show it somehow, and Da Vinci or something like that. But this whole idea here is showing you something a little bit different, isn't it? Are there depictions where it shows that and a dragon? I couldn't find a good one, but I know in my mind I've seen it before where on the sides they've got some dragons, and then they've got the thing there, and while they're showing them, that's a nativity thing right there. There's those people, and there's the 12 disciples and so on that goes with it. And then there's some of the other stained glass that's associated with it is actually the tricks that Jesus was supposed to pull off so he could end up being the Messiah, the prophecies of old. So throughout the history of Christianity, these stories were very popular. In fact, even though they're here in these books that we find today and know about it and stuff, and people try to write it off, and these are fakes or these are that and the other, and it was even all the way through the time of medieval Europe. This is not something that's really sparse in any way. And you can look at ideas of dragons, and you can find gorgons, heads, and things like that that are actually just water spouts. Oh, it's just a water spout. No, that has to do something too. They've got gargoyles on them, all these other things that are really not supposed to be attached to it. And if you're against anything like that, why would you have it running your water spout? It's because right before the time that we're thinking of and everybody's encapsulated now, everybody looked at this stuff a whole lot different. Between the time of Christ and the time of the Middle Ages and the Re-Enlightenment, there was a lot of flip-flopping weird stuff that was going on. And even though it wasn't canon, these preachers in most locations were telling stories that went along with it like this, and it wasn't a problem for them. In fact, it was read as though it was just as gospel as the rest, and these people would know it. So these bonus details aren't known to most people about the biblical canon and everything. In fact, I don't think there's much of a study that goes on and shows you, hey, here's a Christmas tale, and here's what they say in there. If you're going to take all these tales and put it together and say, this is the one we know, and here's a nativity thing, what do they say when they go these tales? You know, because there's only Matthew and Luke, but there's 3 books over here, really 4 we were looking at piece of. So there's more on that than there is on this. Oh, they're not canonical, because a long time ago they decided that crap was out at the Council of Nicaea. Yeah, that's kind of telling too, where they had to agree on things that were in and out, and that Jesus is the Son of God and all these type things. But hey, here's a weird one for you. It's always showing this idea, but hey man, here they are in a cave again. And if it's not supposed to be in a cave, you know, like Krishna was born in a cave and so on, then what is this idea that they have going on here that they're presenting? It seems a little strange. You know, you end up with something that looks, in some depictions, is something real solemn, where it's just her and him and the baby or whatever. Oh, but then there's the midwife thing. There's got to be somebody else there. Next thing you know, there's animals there. There's 3 wise men, which actually is the belt of Orion, by the way. And the we 3 kings of Orient are, well, we 3 kings of Orion are. Orion comes from the east. That's the name of Orient. It's what Oriental means. They're the people in the Far East, because Asia was Caucasians. But this strange tale shows up as there, but then also you can even find Roman tombs when they were just starting to adopt this, and instead of it showing it the way that you would think it would be, there's the couple of different animals that are there with an ox and the donkey, and a couple of birds, and the one on this side is a raven, and this one right here is a dove. And I don't know if you can make it out in the very bottom of the pictures that are here, but that swastika is going all the way across it, and poppy flowers. So there's a lot of connections that people don't want to make necessarily out of it, but with the idea of there having to have been a witness, and there wasn't one, and so the animals were a witness, right? Well, yeah, they are. Look at the stars. Who was there watching? And the shepherds saw it because they were actually secretly astronomer guys, and they're looking up at the stars at nighttime, and they saw something that stood out. But a lot of these tales come from different things. In fact, the December 25th is hooked up through Sol Invictus. It's the end of Saturnalia, and that's pretty much your 12 days of Christmas, if you will, and all of these other tales that go back. But a lot of that ends up going back to Sumerian tales, which predate these, and it shows you the Greeks had real knowledge of the Sumerians and where they ended up getting transposed after their area flooded down, and perhaps what heralded in their civilization itself. But where do Christmas trees come from? Well, we think that it comes from Germans and Germanic and Tannenbaum, but no, that's a more modern time for Dumuzi of the Sumerians. Used to be reborn out of an evergreen tree, which is symbolic of not dying during the winter like everything else, and he's going to come back. He's going to come back, and whenever he comes back, spring comes back, and all the flowers come back. So he dies, and that's the symbol of winter, and this is from agriculturists, which is what pagan really means, and so it's thrown off in there, and people say, oh, well, the Christians just adopted it because it sounded cool, and they wanted to fake you out so you go with it, and start believing something and everything. It's like, no, in our earliest writings, we see a worse form of paganism with dragons and all kinds of things, and that apologetics done a long time ago. By the way, there's Odin. Yeah, he's the one-eyed special god, but then he has his ravens there next to him too, in this same symbolical stance, and that goes with Vikings. So not only do we have trees that come from Balkan type areas and so on, and Germanics and people like that carried on that Tannenbaum idea, but it was carried on through this itself, and from the ancient Sumerians and their tales and beliefs and the sacred cedar forests that were there. And something a little different, I guess, than people would think of. What do you think about this version of the biblical tales that are here? What do you think about this Dungeons and Dragons Christmas? Hey, you want to hear about the Winter Dragon? Or the Dragon of Winter? You want to hear about that story? Because it goes along with the Winter Warlock. And we know that tale's whipped into the tales of Santa Claus, if you've ever watched the story when he comes over the mountain. Kind of crazy. Let me know what y'all think. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Hope everything's going great. Let me know what you think down below. Peace.